Sometimes I just do the show for me. I choose guests and people that I think are interesting and I appreciate what they've done, and I want to learn more about what makes them tick and where they're going. And today's show is with the co-founders of the Hit Like a Girl podcast, Joy Rios and Robin Roberts, and I think you're going to enjoy that. But before we get there, I just want to remind you, Clip Notes is live. Sign up, stay current, our fastest growing email list, and we're really excited about it. Just send an email to clipnotes@thisweekinhealthit.com to get signed up. Also, follow us on LinkedIn. Follow me specifically on LinkedIn. Follow the show on LinkedIn. But if you're following me, you're engaging in a conversation. Every morning I get up, I find a story. During the week, I find a story. I post about that story. And I start a dialogue with other people from within our industry about what's going on around all sorts of topics: digital transformation, digital front door, EHR optimization, EHR direction, you name it. We're covering it. If it's in the news, we're talking about it, and we're getting more and more people engaging in that conversation. So please choose to do that. Now on to the show. Welcome to This Week in Health IT, where we amplify great thinking to propel healthcare forward. My name is Bill Russell, Healthcare CIO coach and creator of This Week in Health IT, a set of podcasts, videos, and collaboration events dedicated to developing the next generation of health leaders. This episode and every episode since we started the COVID-19 series has been sponsored by Sirius Healthcare. Now we're exiting that series, and Sirius has stepped up to be a weekly sponsor of the show through the end of the year. Special thanks to Sirius for supporting the show's efforts during the crisis and beyond. All right, today I am excited. I'm going to get to do a podcast that I've wanted to do for a while. And we have Joy Rios and Robin Roberts, the co-founder of the Hit Like a Girl podcast and co-founders also of Chirpy Bird Consulting with us. Good morning, Joy and Robin. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Bill. Thank you for having us.
You guys are seasoned pros. You know how this goes, but you're on the other side of the mic. Have you been on the other side of the mic much?
I will say that
I have not.
in the last couple of months, I have been the guest on a few different podcasts, and it has been just a totally different experience. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. You know what I found? I found it's a lot easier on this side of the podcast because you just ask the question. But on the other side, you have to actually answer the questions. My work's almost done. I have some questions lined up for you guys. I'm looking forward to it. When did you start the Hit Like a Girl podcast?
I'll go. So we are basically about 2 years into the program now. We started, and the idea for it showed up in the spring of 2018, but it was really just planting a seed. And then we started our first episode, gathering our resources, getting a little bit more of an idea together in the fall. So it took us like 6 months of prep before we got started. And it was just a lot of Googling. It was an idea that I had after going to several conferences and just looking at, I don't know, maybe you remember at the time, but the hashtag Manel kept showing up, that it was all men and all men panels. Yep. And it was happening at conference after conference. And it really got under my skin at one in particular that like the topic of this particular session was on women's health, and it was still all men up on the panel. And so it just became really clear to me that women are not really having, they're definitely people, we work in healthcare. I've been working in health IT for a decade. So I know very clearly how much women contribute and work that they do to make organizations run. They're just not necessarily given the stage or the outlet or, like the stand. Like they're not necessarily given the voice. When somebody asks for an opinion or to be the authority, it's typically coming from men. And so for me, when I saw that it was even on women's issues that men were the ones being asked to be the authority, I put my foot down. I was like, there's got to be something. If I can't wait for somebody else to do something, I'm going to do it. And I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I've been working with Robin already for about 3 years, and we were looking for a change in our career. And I just said, like it or not, you're coming with me. We're doing this thing.
So I'm going to come back to the podcast, but you guys also started Chirpy Bird Consulting together as well. So you guys work together in the consulting world.
Yeah, so we were actually working for a international pathology lab doing health IT consulting for that laboratory, and I got to be the director of product. Joy was the head of training, and she was a published author. I was actually with her the first day in the field when she came to work, and I was like, oh geez, who is this lady? What is she going to be like? And so we worked together doing that and helping run a team of several dozen people that were traveling the nation, helping people with health IT policy, value-based care, at the time, quality measures, the transition to MIPS, things like this. And so that's where we met each other to begin with. And so by the time we knew each other for a while, and she's, hey, we should do a podcast. I had some life going on, a lot of it really, with a sick child. And I was like, I distinctly remember being upstairs. I'm like, yeah, okay. And hanging up the phone. Like, all right, I have no idea what that means, but here we go.
So Joy's constantly throwing ideas at you. It sounds like she's constantly throwing ideas, and every now and then you're just like, okay, one of these will stick, but I don't have time for this one right now.
Yeah, at the time when it came up, yes, and now the roles are probably a little bit reversed, and Joy's, we're trying to do this thing over here, so if you could stop coming up with other stuff, that would be great.
There's no shortage of things to do around here, Bill.
No, there isn't. I'm going to ask you about why podcasting and what you've learned, but I want to give people the mission, because I love the mission. At Hit Like a Girl Pod, our mission is pretty simple. We want to highlight women who are making major contributions to the healthcare technology and the intersection of health IT, and then amplify them so they can, maybe this is a typo on my part, so there can even be more good in the world. We want women to feel supported, uplifted, recognized, appreciated, and rewarded for their professional contributions. And if we happen to fix U.S. healthcare system while doing it even better. I love that mission statement, and yours is a lot longer than mine, but you're really tackling a significant challenge. So how are we doing? When you started this, you just described the whole thing of manels. I remember the health conference just got hammered that one year because there were so many of them. In defense of them, the following year, they compensated in the other direction, because I was actually on one of the panels that they canceled because they said, hey, there's no female representation. We're canceling this panel. And
well, that probably happened because they asked Joy to consult with them, because it came out in one of our episodes, and I think it was in a blog too, that Joy mentioned that this was the event that was really the impetus or the catalyst for what we're doing today. And so they asked her for input the following year on what they could do.
I do really appreciate it. I don't feel like I'm like that much of somebody like a noisemaker, but I definitely wasn't quiet about it. I felt like keep quiet. And so I really do acknowledge them. They reached out and asked for us to consult with them on like how they could do better. I'm sorry that it affected you and your panel.
No, not at all. No, actually, when they called me and said, hey, we're not going to do that panel because it's all men, I was like, so here's the challenge with that, to be honest with you, because we did get together and we said, okay, should we just scrap the panel, or should we go find a woman? So how do you ask a woman and say, look, we need a female representation on the panel? It was actually a weird conversation where we were like, no, let's just scrap the panel, because I don't want to call one of my friends and say, look, we just need a female on the panel. Can you come on the panel? Now,
I know.
I have a lot of people I could call who are very qualified, well-versed, but it would have felt weird at that moment to call and say, hey, can you be on our panel?
My response is I think we all got to get comfortable being uncomfortable, like even just making a direct ask like that. And there's a couple things to keep in mind, because some people will say, oh, we'll get a female on the panel, but she'll be the moderator. And so then she's not necessarily somebody who's the authority in giving and sharing her knowledge. She's just somebody who's asking the men, and that can be a little bit not reflect very well. But they also don't necessarily want to be a token. You're right. It is difficult. And I think that's what we're bringing up is just there's a need for culture change all around, and it doesn't come easy. It's just, it is difficult by nature. And like the only way to change it, I think, is incrementally and facing it and be like, oh, and even acknowledging or being aware that it is an issue to begin with is literally step one.
So 100% of your guests are female on Hit Like a Girl podcast. That would make
Correct.
sense, right?
Yes, correct.
What's interesting, so and Joy, you can push back. You can be loud if you want to, but we set out as a goal to have 30% of our guests on our show be female representation. Do you know that's actually hard? I don't know why it's hard, but it's hard. First of all, we do a lot of shows. We do 3 shows a week. And generally speaking, there's a handful of things that happen. One is a lot of times I get pushback of, I don't know what I would talk about. So there's women that don't feel like they have a voice yet. Like they don't know what they would talk about. And I'm sitting there going, and I have to convince them, I'm like, are you kidding? You're incredibly accomplished what you're doing in this area. So there's that aspect of it. The second is during COVID, I went out there and started doing field reports. And so it's CIOs or CTOs of organizations, hey, how are you handling COVID? And so we did that every day, 5 days a week for about 2 months. This year I got way out of whack because all I was doing was interviewing the CIOs and CTOs for these organizations, but the number ended up being like 10%, if that were actually female representations of executives within health IT that were running those major health systems. And so there's a representation problem and then there's a voice problem. Is that what you're finding still?
So one, we've heard the feedback that women haven't felt comfortable saying yes. Like a lot of conferences will say, hey, we asked a bunch of women to be a speaker and they actually turned us down. And I think that's also representative of the culture. If you don't see something as something that's regular, then you feel like, hey, I'm the outcast. I'm somebody who's going to be different. And do I feel comfortable having that level of attention? It is. It's really uncomfortable. So I can imagine if you don't see very many examples of others doing it, it makes it more, you have to be that much more courageous or brave to be the one who decides to do it. So I think that might be part of it, where people are like, hey, you don't see the representation, so it's hard to say yes. Not to say that they wouldn't feel comfortable or have something meaningful to say, or it's just a matter of, hey, I'm alone up here. I don't necessarily want that level of attention. And Robin, what would you add to that?
No, we've heard this from people, especially I think earlier on in the first year. There's a little bit of imposter syndrome, but we've also run into people, Bill, that don't have just the same mindful commitment to even make the ask. We had a guest tell us that someone came to them and said, how could I have more female representation on my board? We were talking about this on the golf course. We asked some guys, and she said, yeah, you're probably not going to find a woman out on the golf course on Saturday with you in healthcare that's going to be a board member. So you should look somewhere else other than the golf course, was her advice. But I think 2 things, normalizing it like Joy said, but also the thing that I think there's more of an inclination for women to be storytellers. And when you can run a thread through that narrative and translate it for an audience, I think they do a really brilliant job of bringing vivid imagery to what's going on in an industry, what's going on especially for patients and others, and how this impacts people and communities and families. And so I think they have really something special to offer, but I applaud your mindfulness towards it to begin with, Bill, but you got to ask. If you don't ask, you don't get. And I think we're seeing more and more women subscribe to what my Nana told me, which is say yes and then figure out the rest. When someone gives you an opportunity, you take it and you go with it. And so I think everyone has something to offer.
So what are people going to find on your podcast? You've been interviewing women for a while. Share some of the stories, the surprising moments, the episode that sticks in your head, the person that just, after they got telling their story, you were like, man, that really moved me personally. And I think it moved our audience. I'd love to hear from both of you on that.
I'll go first. One of our season 2 guest, her name is Dr. Uche Blackstock, and she was working in emergency medicine, I want to say New York City. She still does, but she had started her own company around diversity and inclusion. And so she talked to us a lot about just disparities in healthcare in particular, and just within medicine and other areas of just how it shows up in life. And these days, especially during the time of COVID, she shows up. She's a regular guest on MSNBC. She's on NPR. She basically talked to us at the beginning stage, like day 1 of, hey, I'm about to start this new business. And now she is like an authority in nationally on the topic. And so it's been really cool to just know that we had the opportunity when we did to give this woman a platform. And I'm not saying it's because of us, because she's certainly very capable, but it was definitely memorable for me that we had the opportunity to talk with her and connect with her.
Yeah. I agree. She has an amazing background in as being a Harvard-trained physician, her sister as well, and her mother was a surgeon too. A great guest. For me, I think Danielle Collins showed up with us. She started a foundation about VR in surgical, for surgical use, virtual reality for patients and for physicians, for both training and making a patient more comfortable. She had a brain bleed that had another complication. It has a much more sophisticated name, but they talked about how she came in, the doc put the headset on her and walked through the procedure he was about to do in the middle of her brain. And she ended up having a tremendous outcome. But we sat there and talked about the utility in medicine and in healthcare and therapy for other reasons. And for me at the time, our son had just recently passed away, and the utility of what she brought to the table and the relatability of what she was talking about, even though it was apples to oranges, we literally ended up in person. And there were a lot of people in the room, the PR people, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. It was a really memorable experience to hear her talk about that and the profound impact it had on her to start a nonprofit to support people using VR in medicine.
Wow.
Oh, I get chills thinking about that one.
Yeah. And I'm sorry to hear about your son. But it is amazing. That's the reason we're in this industry. We get to help people at their most vulnerable moment. And sometimes that sounds cliche, but it keeps drawing us back. If we're really honest with ourselves, I don't know about you guys, but I worked outside of healthcare for a majority of my career. And I really couldn't get excited about helping Anheuser-Busch sell more beer. We made them more efficient. They made more beer and more money. But at the end of the day, when you can have an impact on people's stories and their lives and their ability to connect, and some of the stories we've heard on our show just of, especially during COVID, of bringing families together because we separated them. We created this isolation for good reason, obviously for health reasons, but then bringing them back together so that people could participate in the entire experience was really kind of memorable. Talk to me a little bit about, so this is This Week in Health IT. You talk about at the end of your mission, you talk about if we happen to fix U.S. healthcare system while doing it even better, what's broken? What do you think is broken at this point? And let's not focus on, the reason I start with health IT, let's not focus on the payment models and all those things and whatnot. Let's try to focus on the technology aspects of it. What are we having challenges with today that you two feel are top of mind?
Robin, you take this one. You go first.
Oh my gosh. So I think if I think about healthcare at the end of the day, my fundamental belief is that it's between a physician and a patient. And there is so much in the way of that. You mentioned a couple things, and we won't go into those weeds, Bill, because we can do that for hours. That's what we do in our day job. But if I think about healthcare in those terms, it should really be a hub and spoke. And that hub is the patient, their family, their care partners for whatever's going on. Whether it's an ear infection for a child, a cancer diagnosis for an ailing adult, COVID. And I think one of our guests said it best in a recording a few weeks ago, that healthcare wasn't really designed in that way. And now here we are, decades and decades later, living in a world where literally you can have groceries or a jump rope delivered to your door in hours. And people expect that same sort of relationship with a physician or healthcare. And perhaps COVID has done more for that in the last several months to really transpire and innovate than we've done in years. But to me, I feel like we can't put the patient at the center enough. And if I think about health IT in particular, my personal kind of rub for me is when someone has a solution for something and doesn't really understand the problem. And we see a lot of that. People show up, and we hear about it a lot from guests and VC people and others in healthcare, that we don't have the patient at the center. You got a lot of people with a lot of great solutions, but they don't know what the problem is that they're solving, or they don't understand it well enough to even get to market.
Yeah.
So those are my two fundamental challenges and problems with healthcare and its brokenness.
Can I bounce off that a little bit? First of all, the patient at the center. I heard a great story yesterday. I was moderating something and somebody said, "Hey, why can I schedule my hair salon via my digital app, show up, not have to wait, and all COVID, but I still can't do that with my doctor?" And the quick answer to that is we are not incented or designed still around the customer, around the consumer, or around the patient at this point. We still have waiting rooms. And the reason you have waiting rooms is because we value the physician's time more than we value the patient's time. I mean, are we going to see that change? And by the way, the second aspect of this is when you look at startups, there's a lot of startups that really understand the consumer. And that's what they're trying to bring to us. And then they go to health systems and we look at them and go, yeah, we're consumer centric. And they come to us with a great solution. And we go, yeah, I don't even know what to do with that because we're just not ready and we're not there. Is that what you're finding out in the market?
Yeah, I think so. And it's not, healthcare wasn't designed. It just happens. And sometimes I feel like we keep putting Band-Aids on it and we built this, we made this. It wasn't designed for that. But yeah, I think we hear that feedback from a lot of our guests. That couldn't have probably been more apparent to me than in a discussion we had with an EMR CEO. And when they told us their wish about what they would fix, it was interoperability. And I thought, Lord, the detailed technical framework for that to occur is in hand. It's well within your reach, and you still won't fix it. So that is like a cop-out answer to bring to us. But I think you do see that with people large and small. And your example about the vendor showing up that does have a great solution and wants to bring it to somebody, or thinks there's value for a payer, for the physician, for the plan, for what's going on there. And it's shut down because it doesn't have a place, or it doesn't have a place now. We hear a lot about that.
Joy, what about you? What would you fix in the technology, health IT space in healthcare?
Gosh, to not harp on the access of data, not only just the access of people to get the care that they need, but to have their information follow them around in a way that just feels like a conversation we've been having over and over again for years. And when I hear about people who are able to get information for their pet from their veterinary clinic and within minutes, without a fax machine, without any sort of issues, it just seems sad that we've done a better job to make sure that our animals' medical records are more available than people's, and making sure that people have the right information at the right time for the right people, and so that they can make the right decisions and basically do what's right for the patient. I feel like that is something that we're still miles away from. But given the amount of technology that we have out there and available to us, it just feels like, I don't know what is standing in our way from actually doing it. It's complicated. It's basically where we come from, where we're just like, oh my God, this is this tangled mess that we're trying to untangle and unweave. And it's just, as much as we learn, there's more to learn. And you realize it just doesn't get easier. And so what we ask all of our guests, if they could solve any problem and take away the challenges, what would they solve for? And so it's been really fascinating to hear everybody's answers from that. But I would say most recently is something that Robin touched on. Instead of looking to the future, if I could solve something in the future, how amazing would it be to be able to have a time machine and go back in time and not be having to deal with some of the unintended consequences of laws and policies that we put in place decades ago that, we didn't, and of course nobody had a crystal ball. We didn't know what technology was going to look like and how everything was going to unfold, but how amazing it would be if I could snap my fingers. It'd be nice to be able to go back in time too and just be like, all right, let's look at the big picture here and how really are our decisions now going to affect generations of people in the future.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I assume you're referring to meaningful use. If you're going to give away that much money to EHR providers and health systems, you should mandate as here's the money. And oh, by the way, there needs to be a mechanism for patients to get access to that data. And they had it in there as an afterthought. And the EHR providers essentially said, oh, it's too hard to do, which is the silliest thing in history. Because at that point in time, we could get, package delivery from UPS. We could get stuff out of Amazon. So we knew full well how to do it. Have you ever called anyone out on the show? Like they've answered a question and you just want to jump out of your seat and go, what? No.
So Robin was just touching on, if she could go back in time, there's one guest in particular that we played nice and did not do that. And I know that it's been brought up several times, like, oh, I should have. But it's hard because you want to be nice and welcoming to the guests. It's not like we're here to fight.
It's like bringing somebody into your house for tea and then saying, oh, you're wrong. It's
hard.
It wasn't really, I wouldn't say that we were played nice. I don't think it's really congruent with the mission, that latter piece that you called out about healthcare afterwards. There's even, I think we do, the one thing you do in a podcast now that we've been doing this 2 years, we get a lot of influx of requests. And Joy and I bounce off of each other, pushing back about who we do and don't want to talk to. I think more so now than we did initially, Joy. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
And she'll push back on a point to say, this just doesn't really drive with us and where we're trying to go. This isn't pay to play sort of stuff. Or we just don't agree with this organization's mission, or we look at their leadership or things that have come out of it. And so we're really, I think, doing a better job aligning in podcasts with what we hope to see in the marketplace.
And I would add, there's one episode recently where, so we also like to think, hey, we're dealing with a 5,000 piece puzzle here and trying to understand everybody's piece a little bit better to see how they can connect. And hopefully that'll help all of us in the end. But there's some people's pieces that were like, ooh, your piece is ugly. Like, that's one of the ugly underbelly parts of healthcare that, to be honest, is not that fun to talk about. But it's still important is if we want to understand how the system works and how each of us are making contributions, that even from that place, how are you making it better? It's important to know and at least address.
Yeah, I'm flipping right now through all my episodes, and I was going to say, here's some female guests that I've had on my show that have been fantastic. But to be honest with you, I'm looking at all of them, and you could pick any one of them, and I think I'd give a strong recommendation to. By the way, that is not true of all the guys that are on this page. But anyway, I seriously, I'm looking at it. We've had some great guests on this show. Karina Edwards is CEO of a startup right now. She's doing fantastic. Some of the CIOs who are currently in their roles are doing fantastic. Nancy Ham, who's the CEO at, I think it's WebPT, is fantastic. We've had some phenomenal guests. But let's do a little behind the scenes on podcasting. You get a lot of requests. I get a lot of requests. How do you make the decision of who gets to be on the show and who doesn't get to be on the show?
It's a good question. At first, we were pretty open because we just were like, all right, let's talk to just anybody. But we have a form that people go through. And so we make sure but even before we invite them, now we're like, all right, we want to know your bio. We want to know what company you work for. We want to know the topics that you want to talk about. And if there's conversations that we've had over and over again, then it tends to put somebody lower on the list, because we do want to be, it's not necessarily the person in particular, but the topic that they are going to bring to the table. Ultimately, we want to have a better understanding of the system in general. And so if they can help us understand it, like, for example, in our upcoming season, we have a woman who is helping us understand airlifting, like the medical helicopters. And I was like, okay, she absolutely, like, we want to hear that. That's something that I don't know very much about. It'll be an interesting conversation. Or hearing from a woman EMT/firefighter. I'm like, oh, I want to know what her life is like. That's a side that I've never heard about. So right now we're a little bit, Robin, feel free to add, but being a little bit more judicious on.
Do you pursue them or do you wait until they pursue you?
I'd say it's a combination of both now. A lot of PR companies that like to send people our way. We have a lot of people that just go fill out the form. On our page, we have a community link at hitlikeagirlpod.com under community, where people can be part of our Slack community with listeners and guests. And so people there know typically they can go fill something out if they or someone they know want to find it out. I'd say it's a healthy mix. And then each season, Joy and I usually make a wish list of people, and us or one of our team members reaches out to say, hey, we're really we have a health IT crush on you. Would you come talk to us about A, B, or C? We really admire you. We used to have a Girl Crush Wednesday. And so there are people that personally target, and I'm like, oh, I'd love to know more about her world and bring this to our listeners. And we don't always get our way, but so a healthy mix of all of it.
But that is the secret of podcasting, right? So you have a platform now that you can invite people on to learn about whatever topic you want to learn about. And that's the fascinating thing to me, because I'll call people up and I'll go, will you please come on my show? And they look at it and they go, yeah, I would love to go on your show. I'm like, I can't believe I got this person to come on my show and give me 45 minutes of free consulting on, now I'm sharing it with everybody, but essentially I get to learn about behavioral economics. I get to learn about different technologies, service-oriented architecture, you name it, we can explore it. It's a phenomenal. I wanted to hit on your Slack channel and mentoring and those kind of things. You guys, obviously, as your mission, the podcast is part of it, the company's part of it, but you also have the Slack channel and really promote mentoring. Talk a little bit about that and how that evolved and where that's going.
So I'll tackle that. That kind of came out of the first part of COVID. It really was just, all right, time to level set. The world is a different place. We're not going to go back to normal. What is the new normal that we would like to see? And as I hit on earlier, it's really a bit of a culture shift. And that's not something that happens overnight. And so I thought, what are ways that we can actually really show support for people and encourage that in each other? And so I think that women have been taught that there is a limited number of seats at the table for us. To your point about the tokenism, there's only room for one woman. And that means that among us women, we then have to fight for that seat. And culturally, I just feel like, how can we encourage each other? How can it be that one of our success is actually the rest of our success? How can we just lift each other up so that we're not necessarily competing with one another as much, but instead just offering each other words of encouragement or congratulations or virtual high fives. And so we've created a private Slack community that women from all walks of life really are invited to be part of. And in there, our intention is to just be there for each other. And so we've seen folks that are renegotiating their positions and asking for advice, that are looking for some help on their LinkedIn profile or updating their resume, or just asking for general feedback and creating the connections through networking. Since we're no longer really able to be with each other in person, it's how can we be there with and for each other virtually? And we're just getting started, but essentially that's what we're after.
You guys done in the way of mentoring. Do you have a mentoring channel or a way of helping people to find mentors or anything to that effect?
We started
but that's really
that line. Yeah, go for it.
I was just going to say, I think that's really a next step. We started there and we found that more people wanted to just have the more casual interaction on Slack. We have seen people there asking for mentorship. We also started these kind of mini pods within the Slack to tackle individual topics. And that seemed to get a lot more traction, that you could have this one person who's the expert show up and mentor women on a topic that they were interested in, whether it was marketing or something in femtech or whatever it may be. And we're proud to say that even 2 weeks ago, we got our first male Slack participant. And so we were talking about it. But yeah, the community is open to anyone. And so we have seen people there asking for mentorship, but that's one of the great pieces of advice that I think we've heard from a lot of guests, is that they're mentoring other women or multiple people at a time, or being what it's like to be a mentee and when to move on or find a new mentor to help do exactly what we're trying to do now virtually.
Yeah, and I think that one thing that showed up was one of our guests really put it really well. It's important, one, to not only be a mentor for other folks, but also to be menteed, and think of it as your own personal board of directors of having people that you can reach out to for different topics. that, hey, we're not all the expert in anything, but it's important for us to have the right connections so that when we do need support in a particular area, then we have a network of people that we can rely on and reach out to.
Yeah, you know what I love about this conversation? You guys saw a need, you stepped into it. You stepped into it with the podcast. Then you saw another need, you stepped into it with the Slack channel or even the mentoring channel, and then you adjusted. That's what we do, right? We're customer centric. We say, is this working? Is it not working? All right, we'll do something different. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, pivot.
So how can people follow you, find you? What's the best way? Joy, we'll start with you. How can people follow and find you?
Sure. Personally, I am on Twitter at AskJoyRios. I definitely am involved in a lot of Twitter chats on a regular basis. If you want to see pictures of me and my dog, I'm over on Instagram at _JoyRios. And then, of course, LinkedIn. And it's just Joy Rios.
Absolutely. Robin?
Similarly, pretty present on Twitter at @RRoberts eHealth. I'm on LinkedIn under Robin Roberts. It's Robin with an I. And yeah, otherwise on LinkedIn, you can find my email information there, or you can come hunt me down at a softball field with my girls on the weekend somewhere in the greater Charlotte area.
Yes, I've been there. Now all my kids are in college or beyond, but that is a fun time. Oh, the podcast. That's what we forgot. How can people find the podcast?
So podcast is Hit Like a Girl Pod, and basically any social media channel. And same with the website, it's hitlikeagirlpod.com. And then I'll add our consulting is Chirpy Bird Inc. So inc.com.
And what specifically do you do with Chirpy Bird Inc.?
So we help people with digital health, the merit-based incentive payment system, also known as MIPS. We help people with workflow. We do security risk assessments, and it's not just us. We have a whole team across the country ready to help physician offices.
Fantastic. Thank you again for taking the time to come on the show. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to continuing to follow your journey as you continue down this road. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you. This was great.
That's all for this week. Don't forget to sign up for our clip notes. Send an email, hit the website. We want to make you and your system more productive. Special thanks to our sponsors, our channel sponsors, VMware, Starbridge Advisors, Galen Healthcare, HealthLyrics, Sirius Healthcare, Pro Talent Advisors, Health Next, and our newest channel sponsor, McAfee Solutions, for choosing to invest in developing the next generation of health leaders. This show is a production of This Week in Health IT. For more great content, you can check out our website, thisweekhealth.com, or the YouTube channel. If you want to support the show, the best way to do that, share it with a peer. In fact, sign up for clip notes, get those emails, send them on to your team members, peers within the industry, and let them know things that you have been getting value out of. Please check back every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday for more shows. Thanks for listening. That's all for now.